The happiness that settled over Steffy Forrester and John Finnegan did not arrive loudly or dramatically. It came quietly, through ordinary mornings filled with routine laughter, through evenings where the chaos of the outside world seemed to lose its grip once the front door closed behind them. After years marked by violence, obsession, and loss, the stability of family life felt almost miraculous. Their home had become a place where fear no longer dictated every decision, where love was not constantly bracing for impact. In this fragile calm, the idea of welcoming another child did not feel reckless. It felt hopeful. It felt like a declaration that they believed in their future strongly enough to expand it, to make room for new life rather than merely protecting what already existed. For Steffy, the desire to have another child was rooted in more than joy. It was an affirmation of survival. She had lived through events that should have shattered her capacity for trust, endured threats that rewired her understanding of safety, and still emerged determined not to let trauma define the boundaries of her life. Motherhood had anchored her when the world felt unmoored, giving her a reason to choose courage even when fear seemed logical. Finn understood this instinct intimately. His love for Steffy was built not only on passion, but on admiration for her resilience, her refusal to retreat into bitterness. When they spoke of expanding their family, it was with a shared sense of gratitude, as if they were acknowledging that happiness was no longer something to chase, but something to protect and nurture. The optimism was genuine, but it was also fragile. It existed in a world where peace had always been temporary, where past tragedies had a way of resurfacing when least expected. The shadows had not disappeared, they had simply receded. That truth became impossible to ignore the moment Steffy attended what she assumed would be a routine medical checkup. There was no sense of foreboding as she sat in the examination room, scrolling idly through her phone, mentally planning the rest of her day. She had grown accustomed to vigilance in matters of safety, but health felt like a neutral ground, something predictable and manageable. The shift in the doctor's expression was subtle, but Steffy noticed it immediately. Years of navigating crisis had sharpened her awareness of silence, of pauses that lasted a fraction too long. The diagnosis was not delivered with urgency or alarm, which somehow made it more devastating. The doctor explained that Steffy had an underlying condition, one that had likely existed for years without symptoms, one that significantly increased the risk of severe complications during pregnancy. It was not framed as an impossibility, but as a danger so substantial that proceeding would place her life in jeopardy. The words settled heavily in the room, transforming what had been a hopeful plan into a threat. Steffy listened without interrupting, absorbing the information with a stillness that surprised even her. She had faced physical danger before, had stared down violence and survived, but this felt different. This was not an external enemy she could confront or escape. It was her own body, quietly drawing a line she had never known existed. Telling Finn was harder than hearing the diagnosis itself. Steffy struggled to find language that did not minimize the risk or exaggerate the fear. Finn, trained to remain composed in the face of medical complexity, heard the words with professional clarity and personal devastation. He understood immediately what the diagnosis meant, not just clinically but emotionally. The dream they had allowed themselves to imagine was now shadowed by the possibility of loss that was not abstract or distant, but immediate and personal. Finn's first instinct was to protect, to recalibrate expectations, to prioritize Steffy's safety above all else. Yet even as he did so, another layer of fear began to surface, one that neither of them was prepared for. The revelation of Finn's own medical history emerged not through confession, but through investigation. Determined to understand every variable, Finn reviewed his past records with a thoroughness he had never previously deemed necessary. What he found unsettled him deeply. A genetic marker, documented years earlier and dismissed at the time as clinically insignificant, now took on new meaning in light of Steffi's diagnosis. The implications were not definitive, but they were concerning enough to warrant further testing. Finn realized with a sinking certainty that his own biology might complicate their future in ways he had never considered. Sharing this information with Steffi felt like compounding her burden, yet withholding it felt dishonest. When he finally spoke, the vulnerability in his voice was unmistakable. The disclosure reframed everything. What had initially been a question of Steffi's health now expanded into a web of uncertainty involving genetics, inheritance, and risk. The possibility that a child could inherit vulnerabilities from both parents cast a long shadow over their hopes. Steffi, already grappling with the fear of endangering her own life, now faced the prospect of knowingly bringing a child into the world with heightened medical risks. The ethical weight of that possibility pressed heavily on her, stirring memories she had tried to keep at bay. The trauma surrounding Luna Nozawa's death resurfaced with brutal clarity, reminding her that tragedy did not require intent, only circumstance. Finn felt the past closing in from a different angle. As a doctor, he had devoted his life to healing, to minimizing harm, to intervening before disaster struck. The idea that his own genetic history could contribute to suffering was almost unbearable. He questioned whether love alone was enough to justify risk, whether hope could responsibly outweigh probability. These questions did not diminish his desire for another child, but they complicated it, transforming longing into something laced with guilt. He worried not only about Steffi's safety, but about the kind of father he would be if his choices knowingly exposed his family to danger. They sought counsel from specialists, immersing themselves in consultations that replaced certainty with statistics and probabilities. Each appointment brought new information, but little comfort. The language of medicine, precise yet impersonal, struggled to account for the emotional reality of their situation. Doctors outlined scenarios, discussed interventions, and acknowledged the limits of prediction. There were no guarantees, only ranges of risk and potential outcomes. For Steffi and Finn, the absence of absolutes was both a relief and a torment. It meant the door was not completely closed, but it also meant that any decision they made would carry consequences they could not fully foresee. Family pressure intensified the strain. Loved ones, motivated by concern and fear, offered opinions that often contradicted one another. Some urged caution, emphasizing the children Steffi and Finn already had and the importance of preserving what was certain. Others spoke of faith, resilience, and the belief that fear should not dictate life choices. Each perspective carried its own emotional weight, pulling the couple in conflicting directions. Steffi felt torn between her instinct to assert independence and her awareness that her decisions would ripple outward, affecting not just herself, but everyone who loved her. The tension tested their marriage in subtle but profound ways. Conversations that once flowed easily now stalled under the weight of unspoken fear. Steffi struggled with the sense that her body had become an obstacle, a source of limitation rather than strength. Finn grappled with the fear that his desire for another child might be perceived as selfish, or worse, reckless. They reassured one another repeatedly, yet beneath those reassurances lay a shared anxiety that love might not be enough to navigate this particular crossroads. At the heart of their struggle was a question that resisted resolution: what did it mean to choose life responsibly? For Steffi, risk had always been a constant companion. She had learned to live boldly, because retreat had never guaranteed safety. Yet motherhood had reshaped her understanding of responsibility, anchoring her choices to the well-being of others. For Finn, responsibility had always been synonymous with caution, with minimizing harm even when it meant sacrificing desire. Reconciling these philosophies required more than compromise, it required redefinition. As the weeks passed, the urgency of decision-making pressed in. The window for certain medical options narrowed, forcing Steffi and Finn to confront the reality that indecision itself carried consequences. In quiet moments, they allowed themselves to imagine both futures, one where they pursued another child despite the risks, and one where they chose to close that chapter in favor of preservation. Each vision carried its own grief. Choosing risk meant accepting the possibility of devastating loss. Choosing safety meant mourning a dream they had allowed themselves to love. In the end, the path forward emerged not as a triumphant solution, but as a fragile alignment of values. Whether through a painful acceptance of limitation, or a carefully managed leap of faith, their choice was shaped by a commitment to honesty rather than denial. They recognized that hope did not require recklessness, nor did caution require surrender. The future of the Finnegan family would not be defined by certainty, but by intention, the intention to protect, to love, and to face whatever consequences came with eyes open and hearts connected. Their story did not resolve into a simple answer. It unfolded into a testament to the complexity of love under pressure, to the courage required not just to dream, but to decide. In confronting the limits of their bodies and the shadows of their past, Steffi and Finn discovered that strength was not measured by the risks one took, but by the care with which one weighed them. Whether their journey led to loss, acceptance, or a narrow path of hope, it would be defined not by fear, but by the profound seriousness with which they honored life in all its fragile forms. If there is one place where the illusion of perfection is never merely decorative, but foundational, it is the annual holiday gathering at the Forrester estate. Every year, without exception, Eric opens the doors of his home and transforms it into something that resembles both a sanctuary and a stage, a place where family history, creative legacy, and emotional volatility are dressed in silk, velvet, and impeccable tailoring. Christmas at the Forresters is never casual. It is ritualized elegance, intentional beauty, a reminder that this is a family whose conflicts unfold beneath chandeliers and couture rather than fluorescent lights and ordinary walls. Guests arrive knowing that what they wear matters, not simply because fashion is the family business, but because presentation itself has always been a form of armor here, a way of controlling how chaos is perceived even when it cannot be contained. This year's celebration carries an especially heavy emotional charge, particularly for Brooke and Ridge, whose relationship has survived more implosions than most would consider survivable. The past year alone reads like a fever dream of heartbreak and reversal, Ridge walking away from Brooke with cold certainty, turning almost immediately toward Taylor, entangling himself in a renewed commitment that promised stability, but delivered confusion instead. Brooke's despair, raw and unchecked, drove her to the edge of self-destruction, culminating in a moment so desperate it still lingers unspoken between them, when she plunged into the Mediterranean, as if hoping the water itself might silence her pain. Ridge's rescue of her did not erase what had already been broken, but it cracked open something he had tried to seal away, forcing him to confront the cost of his indecision. From there, everything accelerated unnaturally, the dissolution of his engagement to Taylor, the emotional wreckage left in its wake, and finally, the impulsive, almost breathless reunion with Brooke, sealed in marriage barely minutes after walking away from another future entirely. And yet, improbably, here they are. Standing together beneath the soft glow of Christmas lights, Brooke and Ridge appear, at least on the surface, aligned once more. Their smiles are careful, but genuine, shaped by exhaustion as much as relief. They have arrived at happiness not through certainty, but through attrition, having finally exhausted every argument against being together. Brooke wears a gown that feels less like a declaration, and more like an affirmation of survival, elegant without being ostentatious, as though she no longer needs to prove her worth through spectacle. Ridge watches her with a familiarity that borders on reverence, aware that this woman standing beside him has endured storms he helped create, and still chose to stand again at his side. It is precisely because of that history that Ridge's gift to Brooke carries such symbolic weight. This is not merely a Christmas present exchanged amid champagne and applause. It is a statement, an attempt to articulate something that words have failed to stabilize in the past. Ridge understands, perhaps more acutely now than ever, that Brooke's sense of self has too often been tethered to men who alternately elevate and eclipse her. He also understands the ever-present shadow cast by Bill Spencer, whose wealth, power, and competitive instinct have long posed both a professional and personal challenge. Bill does not merely compete, he dominates, often leaving collateral damage in his wake. Ridge has spent years positioning himself in opposition to that dominance, not only as a designer, but as a man unwilling to be outpaced or outmaneuvered. So the question of what Ridge gives Brooke becomes layered with motive and meaning. A simple piece of jewelry would be insufficient, too small for the scale of what they have survived. What Brooke needs, and what Ridge seems finally ready to acknowledge, is something enduring, something that cannot be revoked in a moment of doubt. The idea of gifting her a fashion house of her own, a brand that carries her name and vision rather than existing in the shadow of his or Bill's, is not merely extravagant. It is corrective. It repositions Brooke not as a muse or a partner who must be chosen and rechosen, but as a creator in her own right, someone whose value is intrinsic rather than conditional. Such a gift would be Ridge's way of saying that he no longer wants to compete for control, but to share it, even if that means surrendering a piece of the ground he has always claimed as his. The irony, of course, is that this moment of apparent harmony does not exist in isolation. Taylor, absent in presence, but heavy in implication, lingers at the edges of the evening like a memory that refuses to be dismissed. Her own emotional trajectory has taken an unexpected turn, one that underscores the unpredictability of this family's romantic entanglements. Rather than circling back to Ridge, or retreating into dignified solitude, Taylor finds her thoughts drifting toward Deacon, a connection that once would have seemed unthinkable. The fact that she misses him now speaks less to longing and more to vulnerability, to the strange clarity that follows when a long-held illusion finally collapses. Taylor's absence from the party is itself a quiet statement, a recognition that watching Brooke and Ridge reclaim their happiness might demand a strength she is not yet prepared to summon. Elsewhere in the room, a different kind of romantic energy unfolds, lighter but no less significant. Carter and Daphne arrive together, not with the practiced drama of couples who have survived war, but with the tentative ease of something still unfolding. Carter, so often defined by disappointment and emotional restraint, looks visibly different in Daphne's presence. There is a softness to him now, a willingness to be seen without performing resilience. Daphne, in turn, carries herself with an unself-conscious joy that contrasts sharply with the guarded postures of those around her. She is not competing for history or legacy. She is simply present, experiencing her first Christmas at the Forrester mansion with genuine wonder rather than calculation. Their kiss beneath the mistletoe becomes a moment of collective pause, a reminder that not all love stories here are forged in fire. For Carter, who has spent years offering stability to partners who could not or would not reciprocate, Daphne represents something unfamiliar, affection unburdened by ulterior motives. The ease between them raises a quiet, but hopeful question, whether he has finally found someone capable of meeting him without trying to reshape him. In a family defined by repetition, their simplicity feels almost revolutionary. Yet even amid these evolving dynamics, Eric remains the gravitational center of the evening. He moves through the party with deliberate calm, greeting guests, adjusting small details, ensuring that tradition holds even as everything else shifts. His insistence on gathering everyone around the piano later, in the night, is not mere nostalgia. It is an act of cohesion, a reminder that before contracts and competition, before betrayal and reconciliation, there was family. The carols they sing together carry a weight that transcends melody, binding them through shared memory rather than agreement. Still, beneath Eric's warm leadership lies an unresolved tension. Retirement has not brought him peace so much as forced introspection. He watches Ridge and Brooke, Carter and Daphne, and wonders what legacy truly means in a world that no longer resembles the one he built. The idea of contributing to Katie's emerging fashion venture tempts him not because it would restore authority, but because it would allow him to remain creatively relevant without reclaiming dominance. He sees in Katie a clarity of vision unburdened by rivalry, and the prospect of collaborating with her feels like a quiet rebellion against the expectations that have always framed his role. Ridge, for his part, senses this possibility with discomfort. The thought of Eric lending his talent elsewhere unsettles him, not out of disrespect, but out of fear that the lines he has spent his life defending are dissolving. Control, once assumed, now feels precarious. The family is evolving in ways he cannot entirely direct, and that realization forces him to confront whether leadership rooted in authority can survive in a space increasingly defined by independence. As the evening draws to a close, the Forrester mansion remains luminous, its beauty intact, its surfaces unmarred by the emotional undercurrents that flow beneath them. Laughter echoes down hallways, glasses are refilled, and for a moment, it almost feels as though this family has achieved something resembling balance. But Christmas at the Forresters has never been about resolution. It is about contrast, the coexistence of hope and unease, tradition and disruption, love and rivalry. This year's celebration is no exception. It offers not answers, but possibilities, not conclusions, but momentum. And as the final notes of carols fade into the night, what lingers is not certainty, but the unmistakable sense that change, once resisted, is finally being invited inside.